The auction screen flickered in the cargo bay where three young dragons had made their temporary home. Scales tapped the cracked tablet with one claw, scrolling through listings nobody else wanted. Broken furniture, damaged equipment, things that cost more to repair than replace. There, Bright said, pointing at a listing near the bottom. Theater space. Lower district. Minimal bid. Wing peered over their shoulders, reading aloud. Structural damage. Water leaks. Non-functional systems. No warranty. The youngest dragon's voice dropped. Sound perfect for us. Nobody wanted dragons anymore. The war had ended 3 years ago, but the aftermath lingered like smoke. 3 orphan hatchlings rescued from a burning colony ship were cute for about 6 months. Then they grew, and kept growing. Apartments designed for humans couldn't contain them. Food costs became impossible. The family who took them and tried their best, but eventually the math stopped working. The trio lived in cargo bays, storage rooms, anywhere Station Meridian had forgotten about. They worked odd jobs that paid almost nothing. Scales repaired electronics. Bright did data entry. Wing cleaned ventilation ducts in spaces too small for adult humans. They pooled every credit. We have enough, Scales said, checking their account balance for the 5th time that hour. Barely. The auction ended in 20 minutes. 16 other lots had sold. The theater had 0 bids. What if someone else wants it? Wing asked. Nobody wants it, Scales replied. That's why we can afford it. Bright pressed the bid button. The screen confirmed. Minimum amount accepted. Then they waited, watching the countdown. 18 minutes. 15. 10. 5. No competing bids appeared. When the timer hit 0, the screen flashed green. Congratulations. Property transfer pending verification. The 3 dragons stared at each other. They owned something. Actually owned it. The lower district smelled like recycled air and old dreams. Shops stood empty. Corridors echoed. This part of the station had thrived once, back when Meridian was a major trade hub. Before the war rerouted shipping lanes. Before the economy collapsed. Before people with options moved to better sectors. The theater occupied a corner lot where 2 main corridors intersected. The entrance doors hung crooked on broken hinges. Faded posters advertised shows from 15 years ago. Water stains spread across the ceiling like dark continents. Scales pushed the door open. It groaned but held. Inside, rows of seats stretched toward a stage shrouded in darkness. Half the chairs were broken. Trash covered the floor. Something had nested in the upper balcony and left behind years of debris. It's horrible, Wing whispered. It's ours, Bright countered. They explored carefully, testing floor panels before putting weight down. The lobby had once been elegant. Tile mosaics showed constellations and distant worlds. Most pieces were missing now, leaving gaps like broken teeth. The concession stand was empty except for ancient candy wrappers. The ticket booth glass had shattered long ago. Backstage was worse. Dressing rooms filled with mold. Costume racks collapsed into piles of rotted fabric. The lighting control panel looked like someone had torn out half the wiring for scrap, but the stage itself was solid. Wooden boards worn smooth by decades of performances. When Bright stepped onto it, the hollow sound echoed through the empty theater. "Hello," Bright called out. The word bounced back from the walls, repeating itself until it faded into silence. Wing found the breaker panel and managed to restore partial power. Some lights flickered on, revealing the full scope of the disaster they'd purchased. Dust covered everything. Seats were numbered up to 400, though barely 100 remained intact. The projection booth held ancient equipment that probably hadn't worked in decades. "We can sleep in the dressing rooms," Scales said, ever practical. "They're separate spaces. We can clean them out." That night, the 3 dragons cleared one dressing room of debris. They scrubbed the floor with salvaged cleaning supplies. Wing found old blankets in a storage closet, musty but usable. They arranged them into makeshift nests. For the first time in 3 years, they had separate spaces. Privacy. Doors that closed. Scales curled up and checked their account balance. They had 17 credits left, enough for maybe a week of food if they were careful. Bright found a box of old programs and spent an hour reading them by the light of a handheld lamp. Shows about families, adventures, romances, tragedies, all the stories humans told themselves. Wing simply lay still, listening to the station's hum through the walls. This place was broken and damaged, and probably impossible to fix. But it was theirs, a space where they belonged because they'd chosen it, not because someone had taken pity on them. The next morning, they started working. Scales began sorting salvageable equipment from junk. Bright organized the scattered props and costume pieces. Wing tackled the monumental task of cleaning the main theater space. Neighbors occasionally passed by the entrance, peering in with curiosity or suspicion. Dragons running a theater in the human quarter. It was strange enough that most people just stared and moved on the third day. While clearing out a storage room, Bright found a locked door. The keypad was dead, but Scales managed to bypass it with some careful rewiring. The door slid open with a grinding sound. Inside were shelves. Hundreds of shelves, all filled with storage containers. Bright opened the first one and found data chips. Hundreds of them, each labeled with dates and show titles. "What is it?" Wing asked. Bright held up a chip marked Opening Night, The Long Journey Home. "Recordings," Bright said softly. "Every show they ever performed. They archived everything." The three dragons looked at the vast collection. Years of human stories, preserved and forgotten in a locked room. Scale set up an old playback system that evening. They gathered in the clean dressing room and played the first recording. The screen showed a stage. Their stage. From 15 years ago, when the theater was full and the lights worked and hundreds of humans sat watching a story unfold. The play was about a colony ship searching for a new home, about people leaving everything behind, about hope and fear and the courage to keep going even when the journey seemed impossible. When it ended, none of the dragons spoke for a long time. Finally, Wing broke the silence. "They're just like us." Bright nodded. "Lost and looking for home." Scale stood up. "Then we should finish cleaning. This place deserves better than what we found." They worked until exhaustion forced them to stop. Then they slept in their separate spaces, in their broken theater, dreaming of stages and stories and second chances. Bright watched 17 more recordings before Scales finally unplugged the player. "You need to sleep," Scales said. "You've been watching for 9 hours straight." "Just one more," Bright protested. "This one is about a medical station during the evacuation of Frontier 7. The reviews said it made people cry for days. That's exactly why you need to stop." Scales pointed at Bright's eyes, red from staring at screens. "We have work to do. Real work. The ventilation system is completely blocked." But Bright couldn't stop thinking about the recordings. Hundreds of human stories, all exploring pain and fear and grief. Not running from it, not hiding it, putting it on stage where everyone could see. Wing noticed it too. While scrubbing floors, the youngest dragon asked, "Why do humans perform their sadness? We hide ours. Maybe that's why they heal and we don't." Bright said quietly. 3 weeks into repairs, they had their first visitor. An old human man stood in the entrance, leaning on a cane. His face carried deep lines, and his eyes held the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. "I saw the lights," he said. "This theater's been dark for 15 years. The dragons froze. They'd learned that humans usually meant trouble. Complaints about noise, about property values, about dragons being where they didn't belong. We bought it," Scales said carefully. "Legal purchase. We have documentation." The old man waved a hand dismissively. "I know. Station records are public." He stepped inside, looking around at the partial repairs. "I'm Roy Baker. I worked here. Stagehand. Lighting technician. 32 years before they shut us down." He walked down the aisle, running his hand along the seats. Some of his tension seemed to ease, like being here settled something inside him. "You're cleaning it," Roy observed. "Trying to," Wing said. "There's a lot of damage." Roy reached the stage and climbed up slowly, his movements careful. He stood center stage and looked out at the empty seats. "This room saved lives," he said. "After the war started, people came here drowning in fear. When soldiers came back broken, families came here to understand what happened to them. When the bombings hit civilian stations, survivors came here to remember the dead." He turned to face the dragons. "Why are you fixing it?" It's ours, Bright said. We wanted something that belonged to us. And what are three dragon orphans going to do with a theater? The question hung in the air. They hadn't thought that far ahead. Just having a space felt like enough. We found the recordings, Bright admitted. The archive performances. We've been watching them. Roy's expression shifted. You found the archive? I thought they destroyed it when they sold the equipment. Locked storage room, Scales explained. Everything's still there. For the first time, Roy smiled. Which ones have you watched? Bright rattled off 24 titles. Roy nodded along, then started sharing stories. The actress who performed while her daughter was in surgery. The veteran who couldn't speak about the war until he played a soldier on stage. The director who lost her partner and channeled grief into a production that ran for 6 months. Theater wasn't entertainment here, Roy said. It was medicine. The city had psychiatrists and support groups, but this place did something they couldn't. It gave people permission to feel everything. All at once. In public. With witnesses. He sat down on the edge of the stage, his cane resting beside him. When the economy collapsed and funding dried up, the theater closed. The neighborhood died with it. People still carry the same weight, but now they carry alone. Roy looked at the dragons. You three understand that, don't you? Carrying weight alone. Wings sat down, then Bright, then Scales. They didn't answer, but they didn't need to. The neighborhood's changed, Roy continued. Lower districts full of people the station wants to forget. Veterans with medical discharge. Refugees from destroyed colonies. Families that fell through the cracks. All of them struggling. All of them isolated. He paused. They need what this place used to offer. We don't know how to run a theater, Scales said. Ido, Roy replied. I could teach you. Over the following weeks, Roy became a fixture. He arrived every morning and stayed until evening, showing the dragons how systems worked. How to repair the ancient lighting board. How to patch sound equipment. How to restore seats without replacing them. But more importantly, he taught them about performance. Theater is truth in a frame. Roy explained while they replaced broken bulbs. You take something real, something that hurts, and you put it on stage. The frame makes it safe enough to look at. The performance gives it shape. The audience shares the weight. Bright absorbed every word. Wing practiced operating the light board. Scales learned sound mixing and stage management. One evening, Roy brought a box of old scripts. These were our most popular shows, he said. The ones people came back to see multiple times. Bright read through them. Stories about parents losing children. Soldiers coming home changed. Marriages breaking under pressure. Families torn apart by circumstance. They're all about suffering, Bright observed. They're all about surviving, Roy corrected. There's a difference. Suffering is what happens. Surviving is what you do with it. Could we perform one? Wing asked hesitantly. Roy considered this. You could, but I think you should create something new. Something that speaks to who's in the neighborhood now. We're not human, Scales pointed out. We don't understand their experiences. You understand loss, Roy said. You understand abandonment. You understand trying to find a place in a world that doesn't want you. That's enough to start with. The idea terrified and excited them in equal measure. We need actors, Bright said. The neighborhood has people, Roy replied. Put up notices. See who shows up. They spent a week creating simple flyers. Roy helped with the wording. Open editions. New production. All experience levels welcome. No fee. They posted them in corridors, on community boards, in a few shops still operating. Then they waited. Audition day arrived. Roy set up chairs on the stage. The dragons prepared a sign-in sheet. They cleaned the theater as much as possible, but it still looked rough. Damaged. Half finished. What if nobody comes? Wing asked. Then we'll perform for each other, Bright said. Though the fear was evident in their voice. 2 hours before the scheduled time, the first person arrived. A woman in her 40s, human, with hands that shook slightly. She signed in and sat in the back row without speaking. Then another person, a young man with a prosthetic leg. Then an older woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Then more. One by one, they filtered HFY start time. 14 people sat scattered through the theater. All humans. All carrying visible or invisible damage. Roy nodded to Scales, who stepped onto the stage. Thank you for coming, Scales said, voice echoing slightly. We're creating something new. A performance about survival. About carrying on. We want your help. Your dragons, someone called out. What do you know about human survival? Nothing, Bright admitted, stepping up beside Scales. That's why we need you to teach us. The audition began, and everything changed. The woman with shaking hands went first. She climbed onto the stage and stood there, frozen. Bright waited, patient and quiet. I was a medic, the woman finally said. Her name was Diana Cross, according to the sign-in sheet. Kumbazon. I can't hold anything steady anymore. Can't work. Can't be trusted with medical equipment. She held up her trembling hands like evidence of guilt. What would you want to say? Bright asked gently. If you could tell one story about your experience, what would it be? Diana's jaw tightened. I'd talk about the ones I couldn't save. The soldier who bled out while I tried to seal the wound. The civilian crushed in debris while I was triaging someone else. The kid who asked for his mother while dying. Her voice cracked. I talk about how I see their faces every time I close my eyes. The theater went silent. Several audience members looked away. Others leaned forward. Thank you, Bright said. That's exactly what we need. Next came the young man with the prosthetic leg. His name was Abel Stone, former infantry. He walked to center stage with an aggressive stride, like he was daring someone to comment on his injury. I'm angry all the time, Abel said bluntly. At the war. At the people who started it. At the ones who ended it. At everyone who moved on while I'm still stuck here. He gestured to his leg. This doesn't bother me. What bothers me is how everyone treats me different now. Like I'm broken glass they're afraid to touch. He glared at the small audience. I want to say that out loud. That I'm furious, and I have every right to be. Roy nodded from his seat. Write that down, he told Scales. The auditions continued. A refugee woman named Yuki Tanaka, who'd lost her entire colony and no longer trusted anyone. A civilian named Liam Frost, whose family died in a station bombing while he was working late. A young woman named Nina Wells, who'd grown up in emergency shelters and never learned to read until she was 16. Each person carried a specific damage. Each had a story they needed to tell. By evening, the dragons had heard 14 testimonies. Not additions, confessions, raw and painful and honest. Nobody performed. Wing whispered to Bright after everyone left. They just talked. That's the performance, Roy explained. They just don't know it yet. The first rehearsal was scheduled for 2 days later. All 14 people showed up. The dragons had arranged chairs in a circle on the stage, following Roy's advice. We're not doing a traditional play, Bright announced. We're creating something new. Each of you shares your truth. We build connections between the stories. We find a shape together. Diana raised her hand. I've never acted before. You already have, Bright said. You told us your story. That's the performance. They started with simple exercises. Roy led them through warm-ups, getting people comfortable moving and speaking. Then he had them pair off and share one memory. Nothing rehearsed, just honest conversation. The theater filled with voices. Strangers talking to strangers, finding unexpected commonalities. Abel and Scales ended up working together. At first, Abel resented being paired with a dragon, but Scales was direct and practical. You're angry because people see you as a victim, Scales observed. We understand that. People see us as charity cases. Poor orphan dragons. It's insulting. Abel blinked. Yeah, exactly that. They started building set pieces together, channeling frustration into construction. Abel discovered he enjoyed physical work. Scales learned that humans and dragons could share certain feelings even when their experiences differed. Wing worked with Yuki, who spoke 3 languages but struggled with standard. They communicated through gesture and simple words, finding understanding beyond language. Yuki taught Wing a traditional song from her destroyed colony. Wing's voice, untrained but pure, carried the melody through the empty theater. Everyone stopped to listen. Bright directed rehearsals, helping people shape their raw stories into something that could be shared. Not performed in the traditional sense, just organized enough to be understood. Liam surprised everyone by volunteering to handle costumes. He'd worked in textile manufacturing before the bombing. Creating beauty from scraps gave him purpose. He scavenged fabric from donation centers and transformed it into simple, powerful pieces. Nina discovered she could write. She'd never thought of herself as creative, but when Bright asked her to script connecting dialogue between stories, words poured out. She wrote about childhood in shelters, about learning to read from discarded books, about believing things could get better even when evidence suggested otherwise. 6 weeks into rehearsals, the production started taking real shape. It wasn't a play in any conventional sense. It was a series of connected monologues and scenes, each person's testimony woven into a larger narrative about survival. But something else was happening too. The cast members started arriving early and staying late. They helped with repairs, share meals, exchange contact information. The theater became more than a rehearsal space. It became a refuge. Diana still had shaking hands, but she started teaching basic first aid in the lobby after rehearsals. Abel ran workshops on adaptive equipment and mobility. Yuki gave language lessons to other refugees. Liam's costume work expanded into a full workshop. Nina wrote constantly, filling notebooks with observations and ideas. The dragons watched this transformation with quiet wonder. "They're healing," Wing said one evening after everyone had gone. "They're connecting," Roy corrected. "Healing comes from that. Nobody recovers alone." Not everyone in the neighborhood appreciated the project. Some locals complained about dragons running a human cultural space. Others muttered about wasting time on art when people needed jobs and housing. That a station inspector arrived during week 7, citing minor code violations. The fire suppression system was outdated. Emergency exits needed better lighting. Occupancy permits required updates. The inspector, a bureaucrat who seemed to enjoy finding problems, listed 17 violations. "You have 2 weeks to comply, or I shut you down." Roy made some calls that evening. Old friends from when the theater mattered. A few returned his messages. One was a retired counselor who remembered the theater's importance. Another worked in safety compliance and owed Roy a favor from decades ago. The inspector returned a week later, reviewed their progress, and grudgingly extended their deadline. The theater survived, barely. During a particularly powerful rehearsal in week 8, Nina performed a piece she'd written about hope, about choosing to believe in possibility even when reality offered only evidence of failure, about trusting strangers even after strangers had failed you, about building community in ruins. When she finished, Diana was crying. So was Liam. Abel had his arms crossed, but his eyes were wet. Yuki had her hand over her mouth. Bright realized something profound. They weren't making theater. They were creating space for people to be completely honest about their pain. And in that honesty, they were finding each other. Opening night was scheduled for 6 weeks away. They had no budget for advertising, no connections to media, no guarantee anyone would come. "We should make it free," Bright suggested during a planning meeting. "Anyone who needs it should be able to attend." "We'll lose money," Scales pointed out. "We already have nothing," Bright replied. "We can't lose what we don't have." They created simple flyers, hand-drawn by Liam, text by Nina, distributed by everyone. The message was direct: stories of survival, free admission, all welcome. They posted them throughout the lower district and waited to see if anyone cared. Rain hammered the station's outer hull the week before opening night. The sound echoed through the theater's ventilation system, a constant metallic drumming that made Wing nervous. "It's just weather," Scales said, adjusting a lighting fixture. "The hull's rated for far worse." "I know," Wing replied, "but it feels like bad luck." They'd spent months preparing, but suddenly opening night felt impossibly close. The cast ran through the full performance 3 times that week. Each run revealed new problems, timing issues, technical glitches, moments where the emotional weight became too heavy and someone had to stop. During Thursday's rehearsal, Diana froze halfway through her monologue about battlefield medicine. Her hands shook worse than usual. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Bright started to stand, to call a break, but Liam beat them to it. He walked onto the stage and simply stood next to Diana. Not touching, not speaking, just present. Diana took a shaking breath and continued. After rehearsal, Roy gathered everyone in the lobby. That's what we're offering, he said. Not perfection, not entertainment, just honest presence with each other's pain. Abel scoffed. That's not what audiences want. They want escape, distraction. Some do. Roy agreed. But the ones who will come here need something different. They need to know they're not alone in carrying the weight. Nina had been writing program notes, short explanations for each piece. She read one aloud. Diana Cross served as a combat medic for 4 years. She saved hundreds of lives. She remembers most clearly the ones she couldn't save. This is her testimony. Simple, direct, true. The weekend before opening night, ticket sales remained at zero. They'd made admission free, but people could still reserve seats online. Nobody had. Maybe we should postpone, Wing suggested nervously. Give people more time to hear about it. Or maybe we accept that opening night might just be us, Bright said. And that's enough. Scales had different concerns. The sound system was held together with improvised repairs. The lighting board had dead channels they'd worked around. If anything failed during performance, they had no backup. We do our best, Roy said when Scales voiced these worries. That's all anyone can ask. The final dress rehearsal was Sunday evening. The cast performed the complete show straight through. 90 minutes of raw testimony, connected by Nina's bridging scenes and Yuki's haunting songs. No intermission, no relief from the emotional intensity. When it ended, everyone sat in silence for several minutes. Is it too much? Diana asked quietly. Too dark? It's honest, Roy replied. That's what matters. Opening night arrived. The theater was as ready as it would ever be. Seats cleaned, lights focused, sound balanced, programs printed on salvage paper. The cast arrived 2 hours early, nervous energy filling the backstage area. Wing helped with costume adjustments. Scales checked every system twice. Bright reviewed timing notes. Roy stood at the entrance, waiting to greet whoever showed up 30 minutes before curtain. The lobby was empty except for Roy. He sat in the ticket booth, looking out at the vacant corridor beyond. Bright joined him. Nobody's coming. Maybe not, Roy said, but we're still performing. The work matters even if nobody sees it. 15 minutes before curtain, Roy was still alone in the lobby. Then a man in a veteran's jacket walked in, hesitant and suspicious. He didn't speak, just took a program and found a seat in the back row. 10 minutes. A young couple arrived, refugees from somewhere distant based on their accents. Then an older woman who looked like she'd been crying. Then 2 more veterans. 5 minutes. The trickle became a slow but steady stream. People drifting in from the corridors. Most came alone. All looked like they carried heavy burdens at teeth curtain time. 47 people sat scattered through the theater. Not enough to fill it, but enough to matter. Backstage, the cast gathered in a circle. Diana's hand shook. Abel paced. Nina clutched her script despite having memorized every word. Yuki stood very still, eyes closed. We don't have to be perfect, Bright told them. We just have to be true. The lights dimmed. The audience quieted. Wing operated the light board from the booth, hands steady despite racing hearts. Diana walked onto the stage alone. The spotlight found her. She stood there, hands visibly trembling, and began to speak. I was a combat medic. I saved lives. I also watched people die while I was trying to save someone else. I have to choose who gets help first, and sometimes I chose wrong. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. She described the soldier bleeding out, the civilian in the rubble, the dying kid asking for his mother. Every detail sharp and painful. The audience was completely silent. Several people leaned forward. One person in the back had their hand over their mouth. When Diana finished, she walked off stage. Abel took her place. I'm angry, he said simply. All the time. At everyone. At everything. The war took my leg, but what really pisses me off is how people treat me different now. Like I'm fragile. Like I need protection. He talked about rage. About feeling trapped in other people's pity. About wanting to be seen as whole even with a prosthetic leg. Someone in the audience nodded along. Another person wiped their eyes. The performance continued. Liam described the bombing that killed his family. The moment he got the message. How he couldn't cry for 6 months and then couldn't stop. Yuki sang in her native language. a morning song for destroyed worlds. Nina read her piece about hope, about choosing to believe despite evidence. And slowly, something shifted in the theater. People stopped being just audience members. They became participants. When Liam described learning his daughter was dead, someone in the third row sobbed openly. When Abel raged about being patronized, a veteran in the back called out, "Yes," in agreement. When Yuki sang, another refugee in the audience joined in, harmony weaving through the melody. The fourth wall dissolved. This wasn't performance and observation. It was communal witness. Halfway through, more people drifted in from the corridor, drawn by voices and light. They stood in the back, in the aisles, wherever they could find space. The theater, designed for 400 now, held maybe 90 people, but it felt full. The final piece belonged to the three dragons. They debated whether to include their own story, but Roy had insisted. Scales, Bright, and Wing walked onto the stage together. The lights came up. "We're orphans," Scales began. "Our colony was destroyed. Humans rescued us, but nobody could keep us. We were too expensive, too large, too much trouble." Bright continued. "We thought buying this theater would give us a home. Just a building. A space that belonged to us." Wing finished. "But we found something more. We found all of you. We found that home isn't a building. It's people willing to carry weight together." The dragons' voices overlapped, trading lines, building to a simple conclusion. "We were lost. You were lost. Maybe together we're less lost than before." When the lights came up fully, revealing the entire cast on stage, the audience was on their feet. Not applauding in the traditional sense. Standing because sitting felt wrong. Several people were openly crying, but nobody left. Instead, they came forward. Strangers approached performers, sharing their own stories. Connections formed spontaneously. A veteran talking to Abel about anger. A refugee embracing Yuki. Someone telling Diana she wasn't alone in the guilt. The lobby filled with people who couldn't bring themselves to leave. Conversations everywhere. Contact information being exchanged. Strangers becoming something more than strangers. Roy stood in the back, watching. A woman in her 50s approached him. Well-dressed, official-looking. She'd been sitting in the far corner, easy to miss. "I'm Grace Morton," she said. "Station council." Roy's stomach dropped. Officials usually meant problems. "I lost my son in the war," Grace continued. "I've been struggling for 3 years. Tonight was the first time I felt understood." She paused. "This theater needs to stay open. I want to help make that happen." Grace Morton returned 3 days later with documents. Official proposals on station letterhead. Budget projections. Grant applications. "The station has mental health funding that never gets used," she explained to the assembled dragons and Roy. "Most people won't go to traditional counseling. Too formal. Too clinical. But this." She gestured at the theater. "This is what people need. Community, healing, infrastructure." Scales read through the paperwork carefully. "This is a lot of money. Not enough to make you rich," Grace said, "but enough to keep the theater running. Pay for repairs. Cover basic operating costs. Maybe even small stipends for regular performers." "What's the catch?" Bright asked. "You stay free and accessible. You maintain the community focus. You keep doing what you did opening night." Grace's expression was serious. "The station council sees this as essential mental health infrastructure, like hospitals or crisis centers. We don't charge people to be healthy." Wing looked at the others. We accept, Scales agreed. The funding changed everything and nothing. They still ran a broken-down theater in the lower district. But now they had resources to fix things properly. Replace the ancient sound system. Repair seats. Update the fire suppression system that had worried the inspector. More importantly, they could plan ahead. Schedule regular performances. Create programs. Word spread through the lower district. The theater that helped you feel less alone. The space where you could share weight instead of carrying it solo. Within 2 weeks, they had requests for 12 more performances. Diana started a weekly program called Testimony Nights. Open mic format. Anyone could sign up to share their story. No performance experience required. Just truth. The first testimony night, drew 6 performers and 20 audience members. The second drew 11 and 40. By the fourth week, they had a waiting list. Abel developed workshops on adaptive living, teaching people with injuries how to modify their spaces and routines. He discovered he was good at practical problem solving and even better at telling people to stop treating themselves like they were broken. Yuki created a refugee support group that met in the theater twice a week. People from destroyed colonies sharing survival strategies and remembering lost homes. The theater became a gathering place for the displaced. Liam's costume workshop expanded into a full textile program, teaching basic repair and creation skills, giving people productive work and something beautiful to focus on. Several participants started selling their pieces at station markets, earning small incomes. Nina enrolled in formal education classes, something she'd always been too intimidated to try. But the confidence from writing and performing gave her courage. She continued writing for the theater while taking classes in literature and composition. Roy officially retired from his day job and moved into a small apartment near the theater. He spent every day there, maintaining systems and mentoring new performers. For the first time in 15 years, he felt useful again. The original cast became the core leadership team. They planned programs, managed schedules, and mentored newcomers. But they also kept performing, sharing their own ongoing journeys. 3 months after opening night, Diana performed an update to her original piece. Her hand still shook, but less severely. She'd started volunteering at a medical clinic, doing administrative work she could manage. Not practicing medicine, but staying connected to healing. "I'm not fixed," she told the audience. "I still see their faces. But I'm learning to live with the weight instead of being crushed by it." The theater hosted 60 people that night. Standing room only. Half the audience had performed at some point. The other half were planning to. But success created new challenges. The neighborhood was changing. Property values increased as the theater drew people to the area. A developer approached the Dragons about selling. The offer was substantial. "You could buy something better," the developer said. "Newer facility, better location." "This is the location," Bright replied. "The neighborhood needs it here." The developer wasn't deterred. "I could force a sale. Property laws favor development." Scales showed him their grant documentation. Station Council designated this as essential infrastructure. You'd have to fight the government. The developer left, but the threat lingered. Not everyone appreciated the theater's presence. Some residents complained about the increased foot traffic. Others resented resources going to mental health instead of economic development. That a petition circulated demanding the theater's closure. It gathered 47 signatures before stalling. Grace Morton quietly made sure it never reached official consideration. But the opposition was real. During a particularly difficult week, someone vandalized the entrance. Spray paint across the doors. Obscene messages about dragons and their supporters. Abel and Scales cleaned it off before morning, but the hate was clear. "Maybe we should move," Wings said quietly. "Find somewhere we're wanted." "We're wanted here," Roy countered. "By the people who need us. The ones who don't want us are afraid of what we represent." "Which is?" Bright asked. "Community formed outside traditional power structures. People helping each other without requiring permission or profit. That scares certain types. They increase security. Not guards or weapons, just people present." Cast members volunteered to keep the theater occupied around the clock. If vandals returned, they'd find witnesses. The theater kept growing. 5 months after opening, they were running 12 programs weekly. Testimony nights, refugee support, adaptive living workshops, textile kreation, youth drama classes that Liam had started, writing circles that Nina facilitated, support groups for veterans, survivors, and anyone carrying difficult weight. The space was occupied from early morning until late night. Different groups using different areas. The main theater for performances, dressing rooms for meetings, the lobby for workshops. Every corner filled with purpose. Grace secured additional funding for basic renovations. They replaced the worst seats, installed proper climate control, fixed the lobby floor, updated the backstage area. The theater was still old and worn, but it was functional and safe. Other communities took notice. Representatives from different station districts visited, asking questions. Could they replicate this model? What made it work? Honesty, Bright told them. People are desperate to be honest about their pain. Traditional support systems demand certain narratives. Progress, recovery, improvement. We just let people be where they are. That's it? A visitor from the commercial district asked skeptically. That's it, Roy confirmed. You create space where people can share weight without judgment. Community forms naturally from that. Not everyone understood. Some thought it was too simple. Others worried about the lack of professional oversight. Couldn't untrained people sharing trauma cause more damage? Professional help has its place, Diana said during one such debate. I'm not against therapy or medication, but this is different. This is community. Humans evolved to heal in groups with witnesses. We've known that forever. We just forgot. As winter approached, the theater celebrated 6 months of operation. They planned a special performance featuring everyone who'd participated in any program. 73 people wanted to perform. They'd need multiple shows across several days. The anniversary performances sold out immediately. They'd started charging minimal admission for special events, just enough to cover extra costs. Regular programs remained free. During planning meetings, someone suggested they document everything. Create a record of the project. Nina volunteered to write it, not as marketing or publicity, but as testimony. What happened when 3 orphan dragons bought an abandoned theater and accidentally created community healing infrastructure. She interviewed everyone. Cast members, audience participants, Roy, Grace, even the developer who'd tried to buy the property. The story was complex and messy and absolutely true. On the actual anniversary date, they gathered everyone who'd been part of the journey. Not performing, just present. They filled the theater, sitting wherever they could find space. Roy stood on the stage, looking out at the assembled crowd. 6 months ago, this room was empty and dark. 3 dragon orphans owned a broken building. Now look at us. He gestured at the full theater. This isn't a miracle. It's just what happens when you create space for honesty. When you let people share weight instead of carrying it alone. When you trust that community forms naturally from genuine connection. The dragons sat in the front row, overwhelmed. They'd bought a theater because they wanted a home. They'd found family instead. 1 year after opening night. The theater had become a permanent fixture in the lower district. Not just a building, but an institution. People gave directions using it as a landmark. Community notices were posted on its boards. It was simply where you went when you needed to remember you weren't alone. The anniversary show filled 3 consecutive nights. Over 200 people performed across those evenings. Some shared polished pieces they'd refined over months. Others offered raw, spontaneous testimony. All of it mattered equally. Grace Morton attended all 3 nights. She sat in different sections, watching the community she'd helped preserve. On the final night, she approached the dragons privately. Other districts want their own versions, she said. Station Council is considering a broader initiative. Community healing spaces throughout Meridian. Based on what you've built here, they should talk to the people who actually did the building, Scales replied. Diana, Abel, Liam, Nina, Yuki, Roy, we just provided the space. That's exactly what I told them, Grace said. The space is essential, but the community creates itself. You can't force it or manufacture it. The theater's influence spread in unexpected ways. Diana returned to partial medical practice, working in a free clinic 3 days a week. Her hands still shook, but she'd found ways to adapt. She brought the same honesty she'd learned on stage into her patient interactions. Abel started an adaptive technology company with 2 other veterans. They designed modifications for people with injuries, testing everything personally before selling. His anger had transformed into productive determination. Liam's textile workshop became a small business cooperative. 6 people working together, creating and selling handmade items. They split profits equally and made enough to live on. Not wealthy, but stable. Nina finished her first year of formal education with top marks. She continued writing, but now she was studying literature and drama theory, understanding the foundations of what they'd accidentally created. Yuki became a certified cultural liaison, helping refugees navigate station systems. She maintained the support group at the theater while building formal infrastructure elsewhere, connecting the grassroots community work to official channels. Roy celebrated his 70th birthday at the theater. Over 100 people attended. Former cast members flew in from other stations. The party lasted 6 hours and felt like a family reunion. But the theater's real impact showed in quieter moments. The veteran who stopped by every Tuesday, not to perform but just to sit in the lobby reading. The young woman who'd been suicidal before finding the refugee support group. The family that attended testimony nights together, learning to talk about their grief. Measurement was difficult. How do you quantify healing? Grace tried through surveys and reports. Participants reported reduced isolation, improved coping, stronger social networks. The numbers told part of the story, but missed the essential core. Wing tried to explain it during an interview for a station documentary. People come here broken. They don't leave fixed, but they leave knowing they're not broken alone. That's the difference. The theater also faced ongoing challenges. Funding remained uncertain year to year. Equipment still failed regularly. They operated on a permanent shoestring budget supplemented by donations and grants. Some critics continued arguing it was a waste of resources. Money should go to job training or housing assistance, not amateur theater therapy. Grace defended it repeatedly in council meetings. But the opposition never fully disappeared. One particularly harsh critic showed up during a testimony night. He'd planned to document everything wrong with the program. Wasteful spending, untrained performers, lack of professional oversight. That he sat through 3 hours of raw testimony. People sharing experiences of war, loss, displacement, trauma. Strangers offering witness and support. Community forming in real time. Afterward, he approached Bright. I came here to write a hit piece. And Bright asked, I can't. He looked shaken. This is the most honest thing I've seen in 15 years on this station. I don't know how to criticize it without seeming cruel. He never published anything about the theater, but he became a regular attendee as the second year began. The Dragons realized they'd created something that would outlive them. New performers joined constantly. Original cast members moved on to other things but stayed connected. The theater had become self-sustaining. We should document the process, Diana suggested during a planning meeting. Help other communities recreate this. Nina took the lead, compiling interviews and observations into a practical guide. Not a manual, because you couldn't manufacture authentic community, but a framework, principles that could be adapted elsewhere. The core lesson was simple: create space for honesty. Remove barriers to participation. Trust that community forms naturally when people are allowed to be genuinely themselves. 3 other stations contacted them about similar projects. The Dragons and core team offer consulting, but emphasized they couldn't export the exact model. Each community had to discover its own version. During the second anniversary celebration, Roy gave a speech that became legendary in the lower district. 3 dragon orphans bought a broken theater because they wanted somewhere to belong. They found archived human stories and learned that we process pain through shared performance. They created space for that sharing. Everything else happened naturally. He paused, looking around the packed theater. This isn't special because it's unique. It's special because it's universal. Humans need community to heal. We always have. We just built systems that forgot that truth. These dragons reminded us. The dragons sat together in their usual front row seats, listening. They'd grown over the past 2 years. Not just physically, though they were larger now. They'd grown into their purpose. Scales managed finances and operations with quiet competence. Bright directed programs and mentored new performers with genuine skill. Wing ran technical systems and created welcoming environments for nervous newcomers that they become pillars of the community. Not despite being dragons, but because they created something bigger than themselves. Late that night, after everyone had left and the theater stood quiet, the 3 dragons walked onto the stage together. The lights were off except for emergency runners. The seats empty. The space peaceful. Remember when we first saw this place? Wing asked. I thought it was horrible. It was horrible, Scales agreed. Broken and damaged and abandoned. Like us, Bright added. They stood in silence, remembering the scared orphans who'd pooled credits to buy the cheapest property on the market, who'd cleaned and repaired and hoped for something better without knowing what that meant. We just wanted a home, Scales said finally. We found one, Wing replied. But not the way we expected. Bright looked out at the empty seats. In their mind, they saw all the faces that had filled them, all the stories shared, all the weight carried together, all the community built from honesty and presence. Home isn't a building, Bright said. It's people willing to witness each other's truth. The theater's lights would come on again tomorrow. More programs, more performances, more people finding their way through darkness into shared space. The work continued endlessly because the need continued endlessly. But tonight, the three dragons stood in their theater, in their home, surrounded by evidence that broken things could be transformed when treated with care and purpose, that they bought an abandoned theater planning to give themselves shelter. Instead, they'd created refuge for hundreds. They'd sought belonging and accidentally built community. They tried to rewrite their own ending and rewrote the final act for everyone who walked through those crooked doors. The station hummed around them. Millions of lives intersecting in the vast network of corridors and districts. Most people would never visit the small theater in the lower district. Most would never share testimony or join programs or experience the particular healing that happened in that space. But for those who did, the theater was everything. It was proof that connection mattered more than perfection, that honesty built stronger bridges than performance, that community could form anywhere people were willing to share weight instead of carrying it alone. The three dragons turned off the emergency lights and locked the doors. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new participants, new stories. The work was never finished, but it was good work, meaningful work, the kind that made broken spaces into homes and strangers in a family. They walked through the darkened lobby toward their living spaces backstage. The theater had been abandoned once. It would never be abandoned again. Too many people needed it. Too many lives had been changed within its walls. Three orphan dragons had bought a broken building and accidentally discovered that home is something you build together. That healing happens in community. That the final act doesn't have to be tragedy. Sometimes, against all odds and expectations, the final act is transformation. Not just for individuals, but for entire communities willing to embrace honest, messy, beautiful truth. The theater lights would shine again tomorrow, and the day after, and for as long as people needed space to be broken together, to carry weight as community, to remember that survival is stronger when shared. That was the real story. Not three dragons saving a theater, but a theater saving everyone who entered it by giving them permission to be completely, honestly, imperfectly themselves, and in that permission, finding home.